But with that, I want to go ahead and transition to our presentation and introduce Adam Whitney, K0FFY. Adam was a student at Iowa State, has been licensed since 1998, I believe. Yeah. Extremely active in satellite, earning his VUCC and QRP, worked all states via satellite awards there, and I'm incredibly excited to listen to his presentation. I've known about Adam for a while, just kind of in the background, but never had an opportunity to meet face to face. And with Jason's help, we were able to make that coordination and welcome Adam to our club meeting here. So
thank you.
We'll turn the floor over to you.
All right, let me bring up my presentation. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, so as was mentioned, I got my license in '98 when I was a student at Iowa State University, so up in Story County. I can't remember the VEs who administered that, but that's where I started my ham radio journey. And at the time, when I was a young student and learning about ham radio, satellites for some reason seemed to me to be extremely technically difficult, and I kind of filed them away in the impossible bucket. And I had wished that I had a presentation like this. So I'm hoping one of the things to do tonight is through the presentation, and which I'll distribute out afterwards, is to give you enough information if you haven't tried them before, to maybe learn something new and try something new out. And my main takeaway is they really aren't that difficult, and there's a lot of fun to be had with them. So yeah, licensed in 1998, but I really just got back into satellites about 4 years ago now, so in 2017. So I have I'll go through my topics. I do have a brief history. A lot of these satellites are before my time, but there's a lot of interesting info across many decades that steps into the space program, the space race, and how amateur radio played a big role in that. So a lot of interesting reading if you do get into amateur radio satellites. So I could spend a long time going through the history, even with just these few satellites that are pictured on this page. These were things I kind of wanted to highlight real quickly. You're welcome to read more about any of this stuff. But it all started with Oscar 1 up there in the middle at the top, launched in 1962. That was the first amateur radio satellite. And Oscar, as probably many of you know, stands for Orbiting Satellites Carrying Amateur Radio. So Oscar 1 just had a beacon, but it let amateurs hear radio waves coming through the ionosphere down from orbit. That was new, and people weren't quite sure how radio wave propagation would be affected coming from orbit back in those days, especially on amateur bands. So that was where it kind of all started. Some other things on here, just to give some highlights. A lot of this you may have heard of, even if you don't work satellites. In the upper right is AO7, launched about a decade later, 1974. You may have heard of that because AO7 is actually still active and operational. It's because it is and has been in orbit for so long. It's one of my favorite satellites. And you can have a contact on it, which is kind of special to me. It's older than I am. It was dead for many years. It's what's known as a zombie satellite because in the early 80s, it died because its battery failed, which is the typical death of most of these satellites. Orbit's pretty harsh, and usually the batteries either fail through their old age or just with radiation and other, temperature gradients, they kind of fail. So AO7 failed in 81, but in the early 2000s, to everyone's great surprise, an amateur noticed that it happened to, be active, and it had somehow shorted, the batteries had shorted open. So whenever its solar panels are illuminated, still today, it's active and you can work it. So very cool satellite. Just a couple on here just before I move on. I guess I'll mention AO40. You probably noticed. I think that is the largest amateur satellite ever built, and it also was pretty spectacular because it was in a very elliptical orbit. It's an orbit we don't have right now for any active satellites because at its furthest distance, it went out 60,000 kilometers from the Earth. So that's even well beyond the where geosynchronous satellites orbit. I think they're around like 26,000 kilometers from the Earth. So at its furthest, if you were working AO40, you could reach a good portion of the Earth. So amateurs, well into Eastern Europe, Africa, even the Middle East on AO40. There are talks, and actually right now in Europe, there is an amateur geostationary satellite. Unfortunately, it's not in our footprint, but there are talks of trying to get a geostationary or another high Earth orbit satellite for amateurs to use over North America. And then some along the bottom, just to give you some variety, you can see different countries. It's not just North American or NATO countries that have produced amateur radio satellites. So you have Fuji Oscar 29, which was operational until recently. It was from the JARL, the Japanese Amateur Radio League. FunCube 1 was from is a British satellite that's still up in orbit and operational. And then more recently, you may have heard of this, AO91 and AO92 were very popular FM satellites. So hopefully they will be in orbit, or more FM satellites will be in orbit again soon because they recently had some battery failures as well. Looks like I lost my presentation here. Let me get this back. Did it stop sharing for you guys too?
Yeah, we did lose the presentation, Adam.
Oh, that's all right.
And
Can you see it again?
So, all good.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move on just to make sure we keep on moving. So the next topic are, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because this gets into how you can use satellites as an amateur, the different types of satellites and how they work. So the most popular and the simplest type of amateur radio satellite are ones that have FM repeaters on them. And, because they're FM, they are very popular because the equipment required, is much less expensive and simpler to operate. So this is the starting point for most amateurs. So they usually have I can't think of one that doesn't, a crossband repeater, and most satellites operate with at least two bands, one band for the uplink and a different band for the downlink. Usually it's 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Sometimes the downlink's on 2 meters, sometimes the downlink's on 70 centimeters. And so I have it down here as an example. SO50, which I can't remember when that launched, but that's been in orbit for quite a while now. It's the Saudis launched it, but it has an FM repeater, very reliable. This is a great satellite to start with, but it happens to have a UHF downlink, a 70 centimeters downlink, which is a little bit less common these days, and the uplink is 2 meters. So if you ever are looking at a list of satellites and you see a mode, the capital letter is usually the nomenclature for that will be the uplink. But the frequencies are published, so it's easy to see that. But that's how that works. So I gave kind of a diagram to demonstrate with SO50 as an example. So the uplink, as I mentioned, is on 2 meters, centered around 145.850 megahertz. And every satellite has a different set of frequencies that are registered internationally and coordinated so that if they happen to be overhead at the same time, that you don't get a lot of cross chatter or interference. Sometimes you still do. The band isn't unlimited, but usually that's the case. So every satellite will have a slightly different uplink and downlink frequency, usually within those bands. So basically, yeah, there are tables out there. Most people will program those into their radios, the ones they like to use, and that's how you will find that. SO50 has a downlink. It's on 436.795. Both uplink and downlink use FM. So I gave kind of a cheat sheet here on, how an FM one, the pros and cons versus some of the other types of satellites. Like I mentioned, FM, high fidelity, cheap equipment, great. It makes it easy to operate. The downside is it's only single channel. It really is like having just a repeater in your town, but in orbit. So that makes things interesting. That single channel, allows only one QSO at a time. But unlike a local repeater, the satellite has thousands of hams in the footprint at a given time. So that can sometimes make FM satellites frustrating. They kind of sometimes their success and how popular they are frustrates a lot of hams. If you've ever been tried to work one on field day, for example, it's utter chaos, nearly impossible to try and get on that single channel and get a QSO because so many hams are trying to be on field day. The rest of the year, it's not that bad, but it is challenging. That's also what kind of makes it fun. If you listen to an FM satellite and try and work your first QSO, you really will have an adrenaline rush when you come away from that because everyone's talking kind of like auctioneers. The satellite is usually only overhead for 15, 17 minutes. So people are trying to get as many contacts in as they can. And it can be honestly pretty exciting, especially your first time. You do get kind of that adrenaline rush. So I mentioned easy to operate. You can use HTs, FM HTs, no problem. It does have the single shared channel, and this is where with satellites, the biggest difference between operating any amateur radio, terrestrially, is the satellites are moving quite quickly overhead. So there is quite a Doppler effect. With an FM satellite, it's minimal. And usually what it means is you will program like SO50, most hams would program these 5 70 centimeter frequencies into their radio. And then as the satellite's going overhead, you will hear the signal kind of go off frequency, and you'll have to tune every few minutes. You'll have to tune through these frequencies as the satellite is moving across the sky, and the Doppler shift is moving the frequency of the downlink. So that is probably the only technically tricky thing, beyond the tracking and getting set up to work an FM satellite, is the Doppler shift. And that brings us to the next type of satellites, which are linear transponder satellites. These are satellites where, unlike the FM satellites, they use narrowband modes, usually CW or SSB. SSB by far the most common on them. And because they use narrowband modes, they usually have about 20 kilohertz to 100 kilohertz of spectrum on the transponder for use by amateurs. And what that means, because the SSB signal is so narrow, I kind of tried to draw it in the diagram down here. There can be many QSOs happening, at the same time on the transponder. And some of these transponders are quite big. So, I mean, there really can be, 8, 10, 12 QSOs easily happening simultaneously on that transponder. So that is awesome. That, just makes them very much more usable and not so frustrating because of that. But it also makes them a little bit more technically challenging, and the equipment you have to operate them is usually a little bit more expensive, especially for new hams or entry-level hams. So you do need like some sort of multi-mode transceiver that can do SSB on 2 meters and 70 centimeters to operate them. They other than using the different mode, they essentially are like the FM satellite. They still have, one band on the uplink, one band on the downlink. But the biggest difference is with that narrowband signal, the Doppler effect is much more pronounced. And so the real trick with these is it does take a lot of practice, even with computers, to get used to tuning and finding yourself. It's called finding yourself on the transponder. So you can use a Doppler frequency cheat sheet or a computer, CAT tuning, computer aided tuning, to kind of get close on the transponder, but you do have to kind of hunt around. Because the Doppler effect, will put you a little bit off frequency in that SSB signal. You'll have to, listen for yourself, tune up a little, tune down a little. Most times they'll use like send a DIT, a CW DIT, or a tuning beep from their radio, and they just listen for that. And so you kind of have to hunt for yourself, but that also is kind of what makes it fun. It's a little bit technically challenging at first, but it is very fun. It's hard to describe, but it is fun to be able to tune them. And I tune them manually, so it just takes a little bit of practice. I have used computer tuning, but I just print out a cheat sheet for the satellite and tune manually, and it doesn't take very long before you're able to do that. So that's how they work. I guess the only thing I would mention is that the transponders are usually inverting, almost always inverting. So what that means is if you increase the uplink frequency on your radio dial, the downlink frequency will decrease, and vice versa. And then they use slightly different modes on uplink versus downlink. So it's upper sideband on downlink, usually lower sideband on the uplink. And that's kind of the technical tidbits of them. They do almost all have a beacon near the front of the transponder. And so I put in to kind of illustrate, if you're a visual person, what it looks like when the satellite's going over and all the QSOs going on the transponder, and the beacon is this waterfall diagram. And so you can see over here this very narrow intermittent signal. That's the satellite's beacon. So it's just sending down its call sign, just like a repeater, from orbit. And you can see over time, as the satellite's going over, you can see the frequency, shift lower as the Doppler effect is occurring. And the same goes for over here. Here's all the simultaneous QSOs happening on the transponder, the sideband signals. So they're not as wide as an FM signal would be, quite a bit wider. So you can, just see, there people talking on and off as the satellite's going over on these different frequencies on the transponder. And that's kind of what it looks like visually. But the same kind of thing, as the satellite goes overhead, the frequency does shift. So let's say you go out tonight and you happen to have the equipment and you tune one of these satellites, and as it goes over and you're listening to QSOs, you will have to slowly tune your receiver dial down to stay on frequency with the Doppler shift. All right, so FM and SSB are linear transponders. Those are by far what most amateurs use, the vast majority. A lot of hams are interested in making contacts, and using satellites for those. But there are quite a bit of other satellites that amateurs use or at least listens for. There are data mode satellites. So there are 3 right now, active ones. And satellites come and go, and I'll talk about that in here in a little bit. But these first 3 have digipeaters on them, so packet digipeaters. So you can actually have an APRS QSO on these satellites. The space station is the most popular, and it has the best radio. But there are a couple others that have that as well. And this third one, FalconSat, it's interesting because it's at a higher baud rate. So it's 9600 baud packet instead of the usual 1200 that you'll hear just on the ground APRS. And not only does it have a digipeater, but it also has a bulletin board system. So if you go back a ways and remember the pre-internet days, it's the same kind of thing. Hams can upload or download messages or data files to that BBS. But the difference from a telephone BBS or a packet BBS on Earth is this just goes over a few times a day. So that makes it fun. I've transferred some messages and it's pretty fun. And then there's a lot of other various ones out there if you really get into it. NO84 actually has also a PSK31 transponder. So if you're familiar with PSK31 on HF, you can do that on satellite on NO84. And then other satellites out there that have data modes are receive only. You may have seen ISS occasionally has SSTV events, so people trying to receive the SSTV images from the ISS and share those around. But also downloading from weather satellites, that's pretty popular. An interesting thing to do. And then there's a lot of telemetry satellites, literally hundreds, where if you're interested and want to play around with data modes and very technical things, there's some Elmers out there and information on receiving different types of telemetry from satellites, which is basically the health and information about the satellite or any instruments or sensors on board. All right, so beyond the how they work and the tuning, the biggest thing you need to know, obviously, is where's the satellite at? They only go over for anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes as they orbit overhead. At least most of the amateur ones that we have right now, which are low Earth orbit. So how they work is depending on their orbit. The higher the orbit, the larger the communication footprint is. So any station within that footprint, and I have a picture over here of AO7, which has one of the larger footprints. It's the red circle on this particular tracker is the footprint. So any ham within this footprint can talk to one another. And that's another reason why AO7 is pretty awesome, because it is up higher than a lot of them today. And so like this particular pass, this is reaching into Europe from right here at my QTH in Iowa. The elevation would be really low on this sort of pass, but if you're outside and have good horizon, you can talk to hams in Europe, which I have done. So yeah, that's how the footprint works. And I mentioned here, France to Iowa is an example on Oscar 7 or RS-44, which is a newer Russian satellite up there. But if you're just on FM, they still have quite a big footprint. So I've talked to hams in Alaska and as far south as Panama in Central America, and you can even reach into South America, the northern part, with an FM satellite. The lower the orbit also means the shorter the pass time. So the ISS is at a relatively low orbit, around 400 kilometers in altitude. So its pass time is usually only about 10 minutes. But Oscar 7, which is much, much higher, I think its apogee is around 1,500 kilometers. It's up in the sky for around 20 minutes. So you can actually have a rag chew on Oscar 7 if you want. And then as far as I'll get onto this on the next slide, but here's a screenshot of a satellite tracker on my iPhone. There are many software tracking programs and packages for anything you'd want, PC, Mac, Linux, any of your mobile devices, Android or iOS, or just websites online as well. And so I have a list of those here in a second. But just to again compare the size of footprints, I threw some examples out here. This is kind of an equivalent of what the previous shot was showing on Oscar 7. When it's over the kind of middle of the Atlantic. K0FFY here in Des Moines, you can reach in. I've contacted Finland, Germany, France. That's about as far as I've gone to the east, but you're within footprint. And then SO50 here was my example I'm talking about, where you can easily get down into Panama and any ham that might be up here in northern South America. And then as it orbits north, you can. I contacted someone in Greenland on an FM satellite, and you can definitely get up into Alaska with that. All right, satellite tracking software. I'm not going to read through this list. I'll distribute this slide out, but like I said, there's free apps, there's pay for apps. Kind of depends on the features in those, but you can find something that suits your needs. In any of these, and they work as you would expect. You basically tell it the satellites you're interested in, and it will give you the time of day. I think I have a slide that shows the tracker. The time, what time they are overhead. What's the azimuth? So it's they're coming to the northeast. How high will it get? It gets let's say 20 degrees. High in the sky to the east, and then sets in the southeast, and it gives you the time for all that. So it gives you an ability of where to point your antenna to be able to listen or work those satellites. All right, let's talk about what you need to work satellites. Here are various pictures. I think most of these are my pictures. I have pretty much all this equipment that I've kind of collected over time, as a lot of hams do, except the ICOM 9700. That's the newest, Cadillac of satellite radios out there. But basically, for every satellite, even FM, you definitely want to be duplex, full duplex, but you don't necessarily need a full duplex radio. You can have one. The 910, I mean, I have it now. It's really nice, but I started out with just 2 Baofangs. And so as long as you have 2 radios, you can have that full duplex signal where you're receiving on one band and transmitting on the other band. And it's really important. It's essential, I would say, on linear, because like I mentioned, you really do have to hear your own signal while you're transmitting to be able to find yourself on the transponder with that Doppler tuning. But on FM, it's also just they're so busy. It's a really good practice to be able to hear yourself, to make sure you're getting an okay, your equipment's operating, and you're not stomping on someone else. So I definitely, no matter what, operate with 2 radios, whether you get a full duplex rig or you get two other radios. And so I have some examples here of over time. I started out more budget on eBay. I got some older, non-full duplex, but 2 radios, and stacked them, one for 2 meter, one for 70 centimeters. And then over time, I kind of upgraded up the chain. There are the Kenwood TH D72 for FM. I have this. It is full duplex on FM. So there's a case where you can use 1 HT, but 2 HTs work just fine. That's where I started out. You can also, some hams start with SDRs for the receive end on a budget, and they'll do SSB mode and quite a many bands. So that's an option as well. They're a little bit more tricky because you have to have a computer, but those will work as well. All right. Antennas, other than the radio, obviously an antenna is the second most important thing. Directional antennas perform best, especially if you're transmitting. If you're only receiving, an omnidirectional antenna, will work fine, but it is really difficult to work a satellite in many different areas of the sky unless you have a directional antenna. So highly recommend a directional antenna if you get into satellites. There are good and pretty cheap commercial options out there, and these are obviously handheld, but you can mount them as well. But I would say the vast majority of operators, you'll see this purple antenna, and if you Google anything about amateur radio satellites, that's the Aero satellite antenna. That's what I have. It's about $150. It is an excellent antenna, and there are part of the hobby. Everyone does all sorts of fun and interesting things with any aspect of ham radio. Breaking distance records is a thing that people, amateurs, try and compete and try and get the distance record of 5,000 kilometers apart, 8,000 kilometers apart of two operators on a particular satellite. Almost all of them that have that distance record are going out portable and using an Aero. So that just tells you how good it really does perform. And it's I think it's a great price at $150. The Elk, it's not a crossband Yagi with the elements at 90 degrees like the arrow, it's a log periodic, which I'm not as familiar with the math and science of that, but that a lot of amateurs use that, and it's about the same price point. So that's a very popular antenna as well. And then if you do have a like the D72, a full duplex radio that has just a single feed, I actually have a picture of it here. You can get a diplexer to combine the two bands into a single feed to connect to your radio. All right. If you don't want to purchase an antenna, the homebrew Yagis are great and fun to build. I built this one. I built a couple others. This is an excellent one. I recommend it. I put the link out here for a homebrew one. You can see a picture here of a guy I know on Twitter that built this and has worked hundreds of contacts with this antenna. So if you like to build antennas, you can build a great antenna just fine and start there. So that's an example of that. And then if you, I don't have these myself, but if you get really into it and you want a home station, there's a ton of commercial options out there for having a antenna at home, mounted on a rotor and controlled by software to have a home station with usually these on your roof or in your attic. All right. So directional antenna, a couple radios, a multi-mode radio if you want to work linear transponders. So what else do you need? There's honestly not too much else you need. I probably should have put the tracking software first. Here's the example I was showing you about. Most trackers will give this view, and you can print these out, but it's basically giving the time of the AOS, the acquisition of signal, when the satellite footprint first begins for this particular pass, which is 2248. And then it gives the azimuth, so the direction. This is rising almost due south, and you can see that the arrow is showing the direction. And then it only gets at its highest point at 17 degrees, to the east for its altitude, and then it starts to go and set near the horizon here in the northeast at 2300. So you can see this is about a 12-minute pass. It starts here, ends up here, and so this gives you the time and the direction that you need, and that's pretty much all you need. And that's why I list a compass and a watch. You basically just, if you're starting this and doing this for the first time, I recommend having this either on your phone or printing this out. And just going out at a time, pointing to that part of the sky, and you can just follow watch your watch, and you can listen to the signal as well and start to do it by ear, but just follow the pass as it goes along. This looks low on this picture, but honestly, 17 degrees is quite high in the sky. If I just stand in my driveway, most passes that are 9-10 degrees or higher definitely clear the houses just across the street, for example. So still easy to work. Yeah, I list some other things in there. You can look at that later. So I gave some examples of satellites, but what are the active satellites? What can you work? The best way, honestly, is to check the AMSAT status page. I have a link here at the bottom, because satellites, space is a harsh environment. Some of these satellites may die tomorrow, and new ones may go into orbit tomorrow and be commissioned. In fact, just the last 2 weeks, amateurs started having contacts on, I don't know where they are on the list, TO 108, and I think AO 109. But anyway, some of these more recent satellites, just came operational this week. So new ones are coming all the time. Some satellites are having issues. Maybe they're dying, maybe they're intermittent. This page gives you the current list, and it gives you a key to know when did amateurs last hear this. So you can see the ones that are all blue across the board are, these are pretty much solid and active all the time. But some of these are not, or they're intermittent. Like I mentioned, NO84 has the digipeater on it for packet. It has a battery issue. It's been up quite a while, so you can see right here a couple of days ago it was not active. That's the yellow. Someone heard the telemetry or beacon, but no repeater was active, and then it went active a day or two later. So this gives you what you need to know as far as what satellites are up there that you can work. All right, making a QSO. Here's the recipe, I guess, if you've never done it. 4-step recipe. And it's pretty much like most other ham contacts, just a little bit of the flavor of having something moving across, the repeater moving across high up in orbit. Step 1, listen for the signal. If you don't hear anything on FM, it's probably you and your equipment. You will almost always hear stations on FM satellites. So listen for those, and you'll know if your equipment's working and if you're pointed in the right place. On linear satellites, they all pretty much have a CW beacon near the front of the transponder. So I always start at that frequency and listen for that, and then I know, how strong the signal is and if I'm hearing it and pointing in the right direction. Once you hear a signal on FM, like I said, you'll usually hear other stations. The best way to try and make a contact is to listen for a station, a call sign, and then call that station with your own call sign. Don't call CQ on FM. You'll sometimes hear that. That's usually not done. It's more just like a repeater where you just want to call another station, or announce yourself if it happens to be quiet. Use phonetics for your call sign. So this is unlike a repeater. Satellites, there can be a lot of noise and there can be a lot of fading. They're spinning through orbit. If you have like this arrow here, like my daughter's holding, you will have to twist it sometimes back and forth because the polarity will switch as the satellite spins, and it will fade out. So using phonetics is pretty important if you want to have a good contact, so other hams in their environment can hear and copy your full call sign. And then again, use full duplex. Hearing your own signal is just essential. To have a good contact and be operating well. Most contacts on satellite are very short. Pretty much you just exchange a quick bit of information, especially on FM satellites, which are very busy and a lot of people want to use the channel. So usually you just exchange a signal report and your grid locator. I think most all of Story County is probably Echo November 32, EN32. Down here in Des Moines, I'm EN31. But yeah, I gave an example. I say I hear K0 PBR, which is a ham I know up in the Twin Cities. I would, if I heard him on, I would call back and say K0 PBR. Or if he called me, I say QSL. I'd give my call sign in phonetics, Kilo 0, Fox Fox Yankee, and then just say I read you 59 Echo November 32 to give my grid locator. And then the last thing, use low power, especially on linear. That's why HTs work. You really don't ever need more than 5 watts, or hardly ever. And on linear, there's a fixed power budget with the solar panel and battery, just the way it works. So the more power you're using, the less power the satellite has to retransmit other signals on the transponder. All right. The rest of the slides just go into beyond making how it works and making contacts. What can you do with satellites? There's a huge list, and I'm not going to go into all this, but it really is a very fun part of the hobby that you can learn so much and do so much beyond just making contacts. First challenge, obviously, is make your first QSO. If you haven't ever made a satellite QSO, you will never forget your first one is probably like the first time you had as an amateur your contact, or your first maybe DX contact. You would definitely remember it, just because it is a bit of a different experience from any other ham experience, especially on FM, which, like I said, there can be a lot of adrenaline. Contact DX stations. This is a point I wanted to make, and this is why I wish someone had told me about this as a new ham. Satellites are the perfect part of the hobby if you just have your technician to get into, because they operate on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, and you have privileges to use that. So satellites basically give you a window into DX, unlike anything else, as a technician, unless you know Morse code. So even on FM, yeah, you can reach far, far away. And then once you get into linear, you can see here's my current grid map. This is obviously several years and a lot of contacts, but some of these far away distances were just very exciting. In fact, this one up here in Asiatic Russia, Kamchatka, this is a guy named Nikolay. I spent years hunting Nick down, trying to contact him. This is the only one I didn't contact from Iowa. I was actually in Montana at the time. But all these other DX contacts, Hawaii, down into South America, I was just standing, at the park down the street. I made these contacts. So DX is pretty fun on satellites. Obviously, lots of ARL and AMSATs awards you can get, chasing these grids and chasing these locations. And then the other really fun thing is if you are portable, which is an easy way to start, go out on a road trip, go travel, go roving, working satellites, while you're portable roving is fun because you get to be the DX basically. If someone hears you in what's kind of a rare grid, people will just be calling you left and right, and it's very exciting. And honestly, like up in Ames or Story County, I mean, there's not a lot of operators on satellites. Whenever I go up there and get on, people are definitely wanting to contact me. So that's pretty fun to be the DX. Here was my true DX trip was I went to Iceland a couple of years ago. And that was, pretty fun because, hearing stations all over Europe that you don't normally get to hear here, even on linear, but this was on FM. And being that DX, even for Europeans, Iceland was pretty rare. There aren't a lot of hams active there. So that was pretty fun. And then the other things like, satellites are good for other on-the-air activities like SOTA. So definitely fun. And then, I mentioned a lot of this. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but here's some just pictures of these, APRS contacts on my Kenwood, what this looks like. Here's a contact I had with a ham I know in Virginia. So it's just, little quick messages, and it have to be very quick because this was on the ISS, I think, and, that's only up for 10 minutes. And here's just a quick picture of, I mentioned the FalconSat has the packet BBS. So here's a few weeks ago, what it looks like, the files and messages on the directory, and an example of a file I uploaded to people. And then, here's some pictures of, I mentioned the images and weather satellites, telemetry satellites. This can get you very deep into learning about, different data modes and modulations and encodings. And then this is getting pretty deep, but hunting for satellites is pretty cool. I don't do this myself, but there's a lot of hams that help. And here's some examples. When satellites are first deployed, it's kind of hard to necessarily locate them or see if they're operational or not, collect the telemetry to see what's going on with the satellite. So a lot of hams do help out with this. This is, I think, a University of Hawaii satellite that went up late last year where, they were thanking the ham radio and SatNogs, which is an open source satellite, thanking the community for helping them to figure out what was going on with their satellite. Here's a little bit about a zombie sat and a ham that listens to some of the probes that go out. So that this obviously is pretty hardcore. This is satellite community is really good about confirming contacts. So a logbook of the world, and then here are some of my favorite QSL cards I got. So it's kind of a combination of the old and new. Satellite operators will send, if you send a QSL card or want one, that's a thing that's popular among satellite operators. So if you're interested in that, here's some examples. And there we go. That was a lot. Hopefully some of that sunk in. Are there any questions you guys have? Things you think I might have missed?
Yeah, Chuck's got his hand up. Go ahead, Chuck.
I have two questions.
Yes.
One, I noticed that in all the pictures of a person operating portable FM, that they're holding the antenna with one hand and a handheld with the other. How are they tuning for Doppler while
Sure.
doing that? You know.
Sure. With an yes, that's usually how at least I operate. Even with FM, I tend to just like to use the mic on the HT. So I will hold usually I set the tracking paper or my phone down on the ground so I can watch and see where it is in the sky. But I will hold the antenna with one hand, and point it and twist it, and then just hold the HT up, to hit the push to talk. So even on FM, and then for Doppler, on FM, you don't have to do a lot of tuning. Like with SO50, with my example, you have to tune the downlink, step, what is it, down 5 kilohertz about every minute or two. So it really is just as it's going over, you'll hear a lot of static come in, and people may start to sound really, the signal sounds poor on FM, and so you just click to the next channel, and it's really easy to tune with one hand. I think I have a picture. Yeah, this is kind of I don't know if you guys laughed at this or whatnot. This is kind of a humorous picture I took, but it made it onto my QSL card. So this is operating linear satellite, and I maybe I'm a little bit crazy because I do this. Obviously, I'm wearing the radio, so I have the tuning knobs closer to me and the display, but I do use the hand mic. A lot of hams will use like a foot pedal or a push to talk on the antenna with a headset. But you can do it with just two hands. But it's the tuning again. It's more. It does take a lot more hands to do it with linear satellites. But once you find your frequency, it's a little bit more tuning than an FM. But you still just are kind of adjusting the dial, every 10, 20 seconds. During the pass, even if you're within a QSO, you may just kind of, just need to bump the dial a little bit, as you're talking and having that contact, if at all. So it's still tuning it while you're holding the antenna and being portable. It takes some practice, but it is doable, and it's not too hard, especially if you use a headset. I'm just crazy. I think most people use the headset and the foot pedal or the button on the antenna.
And my second question then is, I know historically, way back in the day, at some point, some of the satellites had a 10 meter or 15 meter downlink. Mm-hmm. Do any of those still exist?
There's only two right now that do. The NO84 uses 10 meters, I think, for its uplink on PSK. So that's not a voice mode. So that may not be as interesting to you, but it uses 10 meters. And then Oscar 7 actually has two modes. I don't know if it's on. Yeah, here on this status page, there's an A and a B for AO7. It usually wakes up in mode B, which is the 2 meter, 70 centimeters. And that's what most hams like because that's the common equipment. But this mode A is a 10 meter downlink. And I've actually done a couple of contacts on it. So yeah, I just 10 meter band SSB radio with the downlink, and I've thrown up like a dipole or even a big vertical to hear the downlink on it. And like I said, it usually Oscar 7 only wakes up when the sun shines on it, so it goes to sleep usually every orbit, and then mostly wakes up in mode B. But there are 2 times of the year for like a week or two where it's illuminated during the entire orbit, and then it will stay in mode A for 24 hours. So if you were ever interested in trying to work with the 10 meter bands on Oscar 7, it's usually around the spring equinox and fall equinox, maybe slightly before or after, where for 24 it's predictable. So for 24 hours, it will stay in that mode A with 10 meters.
Okay.
Very good. Skip, you're next.
Well, thank you, Adam.
Yeah.
A couple of basic definitions that probably went right past me. Can you compare the FM satellite and a linear satellite, and the term satellite and transponder? They're related but not synonyms, I gather.
Yeah. I honestly, usually people use the word transponder for linears and repeaters for FM, but I've heard the FM satellites called the FM transponder. So they are honestly synonymous. It's just people tend to refer to the linear repeaters as transponders, and I think that's giving the idea of what the main difference is. And the main difference is on linears, you can have, it's not just a single channel. That's the biggest difference. It uses these narrow band modes like SSB or even CW, so you can have multiple channels or simultaneous of these signals on the single satellite, whereas FM, the repeater or transponder is only wide enough to support that single FM signal. You cannot have two signals or channels happening on the FM satellite. That is the biggest difference between the two. They still obviously put both up into orbit just because, I mean, amateurs are interested in both. They're interested in FM, has that really nice high fidelity audio quality, and the equipment's easier and you don't have to learn Doppler tuning. So hams, they're very popular with hams. But linears are as well, just because they're way more efficient. You can have these multiple hams at the same time using them.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Can I use an FM radio on a linear satellite?
No.
The short answer is no.
Okay.
Technically you could, but you would get a lot of angry emails and people hunting you down, because it would inject a very wide signal and basically fill up the whole transponder and not allow anyone else to get in.
Okay. Okay. Why is the Doppler effect different for FM versus the linear satellites if they were at the same altitude and speed?
Mm-hmm. I think it, and you'll have to forgive me. I mean, I'm not probably the most technically adept ham, but I think it really has to do with the width of the signal. This SSB signal is you guys can maybe help me, but I think it's like just about 2.5 to 3 kilohertz wide, I believe, a single sideband signal. The FM is, I think, starts at 5 kilohertz for a narrowband FM. So you with your receiver in SSB mode, it is trying to listen just for that very narrow width of a signal. And so, if it's like, I'm trying to draw with my mouse. Let's say you're just listening to the signal that's here right in the middle. Your receiver, is just trying to hear a signal that is that very narrow width. And so as the Doppler shifts that narrow width signal, even a few, a kilohertz and a half, 2 kilohertz, it very quickly will go out of what your receiver's listening for, the bandwidth that it's listening for at that frequency. So it will give the impression that the Doppler is more, pronounced for a linear, just because your receiver's listening to such a much more narrow signal. It still happens, it's the same frequency and it happens at the same, rate, the Doppler effect. Like you pointed out, the satellite's at the same height, they're at the same frequencies. The Doppler effect really isn't any different, but on FM, it just appears, to your ears and to your radio, not as pronounced because it's listening to a much wider signal. In fact, I think most radios will probably be in a wideband FM mode, because I think FM is narrowband at 5,000 or 5 kilohertz wide, and then wideband I think is, I don't even know, 15,000. So I think the receivers just, as that shifts at the same amount, they will still pick up the signal quite a bit better than an SSB signal. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay. It does make sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Skip. Ron, you've got a question.
Yeah. To account for Doppler shift.
Sorry, Ron, I just accidentally muted you. Talk again. Sorry.
Okay.
I can hear you. Go
to
ahead.
account for Doppler shift, you're adjusting your receive frequency. Do you ever adjust the transmit frequency to keep the same frequency on the satellite, or how do you operate in general?
Yes, that's a very good question. I didn't want to overwhelm with those details, but especially if you're working a linear transponder, I guess the rule of thumb, and again, I may not be exactly right on how this technically works, but in practice, you will be tuning 70 centimeters quite a bit more than 2 meters. And so that just depends on if the satellite has the downlink on 70 centimeters or the uplink on 70 centimeters. This Chinese satellite CAS-4B, its downlink is on 70 centimeters. You can see down here on the picture. So if I'm listening to this satellite or working contacts, I will mostly be tuning my downlink to continue to hear myself and the other station while the Doppler shifting. I'll be tuning the receive radio basically. But on this other satellite up here, RS-44, it has its uplink on 70 centimeters, so it's the opposite. And in that case, I will be tuning my transmitter, but I'm tuning the same band the most. The 70 centimeter, as the satellite goes over, has the most Doppler shift. For listening or working that satellite. Now, 2 meters still does have a frequency shift, but it's far less drastic. Let's say like with these 70 centimeter ones, I mean, I'll pretty much have my finger on that 70 centimeter dial almost all the time, and I'm doing it manually. Your computer will do this if you use a computer, but every I don't know, 10 to 20 seconds, I'm bumping that just a little bit to keep on signal. But on 2 meters, I 30, 45, almost a minute can go by where I really won't have to touch that, but I will eventually have to tune for Doppler on 2 meters.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Ron?
Yeah, somewhat. So you tune either the transmit or the receive depending on the satellite, basically.
Yes, that is the simple rule and thumb. It depends on the satellite, and it's either the transmit or receive, but it depends on which one is on 70 centimeters. The simplest rule of thumb is whatever uplink or downlink is on the 70 centimeter band, that's what you'll be tuning for that satellite. Now, especially the software that does the tuning for you, it gives you the option, and some hams will choose the other options where it will give you the option of tuning only the uplink or only the downlink, or keeping both on frequency. So out there in practice, people are using 3 or 4 different tuning methods. There isn't a, you must do this one gold standard, but I would say at least 80% of the operators are using the tune the 70 centimeter band, and it depends on the satellite on if it's the uplink or the downlink.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah. There's a lot of debate and discussion about this. So if you want to know more, Google for that topic, and you'll have no end of reading about that.
Chris, you've got a question. Go ahead.
Do they have any plans on grabbing those satellites that are ghost satellites and possibly repairing them and then putting them back in service full time? Or
so that's an interesting topic. This is obviously a very hot topic right now because with like SpaceX and just all the different launch options the past few years, there's been a lot more satellites in orbit. So there's a lot of discussion around orbital debris, and there has been for many years rules in place about that, but that's getting even more important. And then I mentioned like trying to coordinate all the frequencies, especially for using ham bands. And there's even some like commercial satellites that have, quote unquote, stolen or used ham bands without authorization, and the international authorities have had to crack down. So, but to focus on your question, there are, I think, at least 2 experimental satellites up there right now that are working on methods to capture and repair satellites. They're just experimental, so they don't have kind of a general purpose like fix it, satellite up there that can go grab and repair satellites yet. But they're working on figuring that technology out, and then installing that capture ability and ability to repair on satellites going forward. Where I guess probably where it makes sense. So that's in the works. There's no real capability to do that now. In fact, I think if you follow the space program, you'll recall like when the Hubble Space Telescope had some issues with its mirrors. One of the I don't know if it was the final one, but one of the later space shuttle missions, they actually extended or added a mission to go repair Hubble again, because other than having humans go up there and get tools out and do it, it's really impossible to repair any of these things right now with any sort of robotic technology that we have. But they are working on it. The answer right now is with orbital debris is you have to get a license for different heights of orbits. And then if you go above a certain height, you have to have plans to basically you have to have thrusters or some sort of propulsion to be able to deorbit your satellite, in a controlled method. So that's why a lot of amateur satellites these days aren't at these very high orbits anymore, because the restrictions of going up that high are basically having to put propulsion systems, and it's just too expensive to do that, let alone get the permits.
Any other questions for Adam? All right, hearing none, Adam, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. I think this is honestly one of the most succinct explanations of amateur satellites and the opportunities are out there, and obviously you're an amazing testament to what you can achieve with a very modest portable station and a lot of hard work, obviously. So thank you for joining us tonight. Greatly appreciate your sharing your knowledge with us, and you're welcome to stick around as much or as little as you care to. We're going to jump into our business portion of our meeting here. So.